For everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, while he who humbles himself shall be exalted. The theme of Lent, the basis of our conversion, is in fact humility, and it is something that we have to continually work to acquire. We must not spurn the discipline of the Lord, and Lent is a special time in which we have applied to us God's discipline and many opportunities to humble ourselves. Our Lord gives us the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee who come before God in the synagogue, and one professes his righteousness before God, the Pharisee, and the other confesses his sins before God. And it is the tax collector, the sinful tax collector, that goes home justified rather than the self-righteous Pharisee. The Pharisee says to God, I fast twice a week, I pay tithes on all I possess. The other man, however, kept his distance, not even daring to raise his eyes to heaven. All he did was beat his breast and say, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Tax collector stood there and talked about the good works he did, and the Pharisee stood there and talked about the good works that he did, and the tax collector talked about his sinfulness. Interesting thing here is that it's very likely that what the tax collector said was true, that he did do those things. He did pay tithes, he did fast, and all the rest. And it is also true that the tax collector was a sinful man. But one thing that's missing here in the Pharisee's account of himself is his own sinfulness. There's nobody that could go before God and stand there and profess their righteousness as though that were the only thing to say. Nobody, except for our Blessed Lady. We come before God's presence sometimes, and we dare to come before God's presence without humility. This is what the tax collector did, and he was blind to the truth. He was blind to the truth. Even in the Pharisee, but the tax collector also came before God and confessed his sins, and probably that wasn't the only thing to say, but that's the only thing he thought was worth saying before God at that moment. He humbled himself. He was willing to change his life. He wanted God's mercy. And so as we continue in Lent, we need to be open to God's grace, open to His discipline, open to His correction. For religious, that means also a correction within the community, fraternal correction, most especially correction from the superiors. We need to recognize that our way of life is a life of penance. It's truly a life of penance. We're professional penitents. It's what we do for a living. And we're called to bear witness to our penance in the world in which we live. St. Francis reminds us in the Rule that we are to mind our own business, really, and to concentrate on our own conversion and not despise anyone else, despise ourselves rather than despising others, which is exactly the opposite of what was going on here in the Gospel with the Pharisee. He was despising tax collector and exalting himself. Our Lord makes it very plain, clear, and simple. For everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, while he who humbles himself shall be exalted. Let us then recognize the opportunities that we have every day to go along the purgative way, the way of our conversion, the way of purgation, the way of self-emptying, the way of humility, and say with the tax collector, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner."
You Christus.